This is our final installment of our COVID Conversations in Higher Ed webinar series, and we are finishing off with Blinn College and Robeson Community College, and we're so excited to show you the data side of things from some of our newer partners, and so you get a fresh perspective. So starting out here with our agenda, we have first some introductions really briefly. We're going to dive right into our moderated conversation with our panelists. And then at the end, I'm going to plug our little survey. Y'all will be getting it as soon as the webinar ends. And we'd really love for you to give some feedback on how you thought this series went and ideas for us to keep improving. And then we're going to close out with some audience Q&A for the last 15 minutes or so. So if you have questions and they come to you during the webinar, please put those in the chat. And when we get to the Q&A time, I will go through those in the order that they've been received. So please keep those questions in mind. So now just a little intro on Upswing. For anyone who's not familiar, we are a non-traditional student retention and engagement company. We were founded in 2013, and we really provide integrated student services to colleges and universities across the country. So this includes things like online advising, tutoring, writing support. Our newest module helps support mental wellness, and an SMS-based engagement tool that you'll hear more about today. And we've helped over 100 institutions extend their services online, and we're really excited to showcase some of the work that our partners have been doing today. So that brings us to our featured speakers. We have from Blinn, Joyce Langenegger, the Executive Director of Academic Success, and from Robeson Community College, we have Vonda, the Director of Academic Success. And then from the Upswing side of things, we have Marissa Rodriguez. Some of you may know her. She's our engagement manager, and she does amazing work with our partners to help them really engage students on a more personal level. So I'll let them say hi.
Hello and welcome to today's session.
Hi, from Robeson Community College.
Hey everyone, glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. So let's dive right in. Blinn, Robeson, two really different schools. Can you tell our audience, what did your campuses look like when COVID first hit?
I'll talk about Robeson Community College. We are a rural school in Robeson County, which is one of the poorest counties in the state of North Carolina. But as far as our ratio of online and in-person before the pandemic, I would estimate it was about 40%. I'm not quite sure, and I'd asked several people, but didn't get to the right person. And our staff right now, some are on campus and some are away. So, but I'm not sure exactly the exact percentage, but the good thing about our school, even though we're a small school and our resources have been limited, and, you know, like I said, we're from a rural disadvantaged area, our campus had kind of prompted, I guess you would say, or prepared our faculty for being in that online era, in that every one of our programs and all of our courses, there was some type of online presence. So even if our faculty had not been using online for some time, they were kind of being forced, I guess, to have that information there online in our hybrid, in our blended courses, and even in our face-to-face. So all of our students, I will be willing to say about 80% had had that experience, and all of our instructors, because we had prompted them to have an online presence. So before the pandemic, I think we were in okay shape. I'm sure when the pandemic struck, people were still, you know, probably like deer in the headlights, because they knew then it would have to go to some type of full-blown online presence. But right. I would say that we were in pretty good shape.
Awesome. Joyce, what about from the Blinn perspective?
Well, Blinn has 5 different campuses. Like Robeson, we do have a couple of truly rural campuses with very small enrollment and limited services immediately available to students on those campuses. And then we are in College Station, so Bryan College Station. So we are partnered pretty tightly with Texas A&M University, We have some shared enrollment of students and those kinds of things. Before the pandemic, we had about 17,500 students, and about 15% of them were taking online courses.
Okay.
This semester, and I just checked this morning because somebody sent me the data. We have about 16,100 students, and about 33% of them are in online classes. So a real shift to that
Sure.
environment. We are a Quality Matters school, so our online courses, we've had our faculty who are teaching those online courses have had a lot of training in course design, and those courses are designed to meet the Quality Matters standards.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty large percentage of the faculty who teach at least one class online.
Okay.
We also have training in our learning management system platform that everybody has to take. So they're familiar with how to use that platform, and the students are used to going there to get information as well. One of the things we did, though, because a lot of those face-to-face instructors are not on the platform on a regular basis, is we simplified the training materials so that you could get exactly what you needed to know to get that test set up so the students could take the test, those kinds of things. So we were in some ways well positioned, but we also moved more than 2,000 courses into an online environment.
Yeah, that's a big change for sure,
yeah.
for sure. So, speaking of the change side of things, right? You guys had slightly different levels of preparedness going into this, and I'm sure everyone had some big, lofty goals for 2020 before the pandemic. So, can you tell us a little bit about what those goals were at the beginning of the year, and then once COVID hit and we said, "Oh, this is here to stay," how did that change?
Well, I can tell you that just looking at, if you go back and you look at what personnel-wise, what I said I was going to do for my goals in 2020, 2021, it was, or 19 and 20. One of them was to develop a more rigorous evaluation process. Among the things I do is I oversee all of our faculty development. And so more rigorous process to evaluate that. I was going to write and get an article published, all these things that sound very leisurely and self-indulgent in the world we live in today.
Sure. Yeah, that's so different. Vonda, what about you? How did your goals change?
As far as the institution, we have been focusing, I think, like most schools, on our enrollment numbers, and there were things that we were doing to try and increase that. But when the pandemic hit, like most schools, I think we were just hoping we could hold on to those numbers. So
Sure.
we had to swiftly change our train of thought from, increasing those numbers to what can we do to keep the numbers that we have. And so we did a lot of things. I mean, we went into that online mode and that personal, I guess, hold your hand kind of mode, where because people were experiencing so many different things from so many different angles. By us being in this county where things aren't readily available and the resources are limited, we had to think out of the box. And I know our state was doing that, not just us, where we had drive-in Wi-Fi. We were now, getting computers and getting monies together, or asking even my learning center, guys, do you have laptops? Because we plan to issue out laptops to students to let them use it for the pandemic. I mean, it was just, we weren't winging it, but we were really thinking outside of the box on, what is it that we can do? Because like I said, those goals of making the numbers larger now have gone to, let's just maintain what we've got. So I think we did a really good job with that. And so now we are still doing the same thing because it's still not over. We have not fully come back to campus. Of course, our health sciences and some of those other programs like that, they're here. They're going to be here.
Yeah.
But all of our students aren't back. So we have actually used some of our grant monies to bring personnel in And those personnel are calling students to say what's up, what's going on. We've actually hired advisors. That was something, one of our goals before the pandemic. We were really looking at, are we going to shift our advising over from our faculty? Would it be a good thing to shift it over from faculty to have a quote true advising center? So with that pandemic hitting, I think it has kind of shifted our thought to yes, we do need that. So with some grant monies that we've had, we had hired some people, but with more grant monies, we've hired more people to be advisors and coaches. And they're literally calling these students and saying, what's going on? We see, we're getting an alert, what's happening with you. And they're actually doing those referrals now to the learning center or to the counseling office for situations. That it's just changed everything. It's just changed our way. And I think we've become more personal, honest. Not that we weren't before, but we really are more personable now because we're really getting down to the nitty gritty with our students and saying, what is it that you need? How can we help you? And it's moving away from quote numbers. And I think, we're all kind of guilty of that, not just us, but it has made us very aware of our surroundings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned student needs. That kind of segues perfectly here. How did you guys actually determine like what were the number one, two, and three, needs that your college actually could address? I mean, obviously things cropped up throughout the whole year that were challenges, and kind of what, starting off with the first half of this question, what role did data play in like addressing and figuring out those needs?
Well, I think, one of the goals we had before the pandemic was we were really thinking about how are we going to meet the needs of our distance learning and dual credit students who aren't on our campuses and our students who are on those more remote campuses. Suddenly, with COVID, everybody became a distance learning student.
Right.
And so that's actually what prompted us to adopt Upswing and adopt it quickly because as Vonda said, meeting those student needs is critical. And any support services that we could bring online, we needed to do it as quickly as possible. So we had lots of activity in our tutoring center when it was face-to-face, and that became a primary goal. We also did do some reach out to students as well, just to learn from them what they needed. One of the pieces we observed is that students suddenly placed in 5 courses that started out face-to-face and suddenly were all online were desperately struggling to figure out how to survive in that online environment. And so one of the changes we've made is that we are now much more reliant on the 8-week semesters so that they're only taking 2 courses at a time and not struggling to figure out how to adjust to 4 or 5 courses at a time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Vonda, how about on the Robeson side? I know you guys were not working with Upswing at the start of the year. So what kind of prompted you guys to look in that direction as COVID kind of dragged on?
Actually, I had already been looking at Upswing and had already talked with Daryl. I know I talked with him, and we had not got the contract going just yet. So when the pandemic hit, I was like I'm like, oh my goodness, just when I should have had it in place. And I have been pushing for it because from my standpoint as a learning center director, the director of academic success here at Robeson, I knew the platform that we were using was not suffice. We needed more. And so when I met with Upswing, I was just wowed by everything. And I'm coming out, I'm a licensed counselor, and then, here I'm in the learning center. And as I've been in the school system for so long, I'm like, this is good. I mean, there might be other programs out there, but this program is more, fulfilling and what I need. There's more things, there, because the old program, it had a whiteboard, but with you guys, you can you can see the screen, you can hear, ADA compliance, all that stuff runs into play for me. So I knew Upswing was what I wanted. And so when the pandemic hit, of course, everything was crazy. And I kept screaming, we've got to get this, because I will commend our tutors here in the Learning Center. They literally were tutoring every method you can think of. They were using the whiteboard. We found out about Quick Assist later on, but it's like, gosh, we wish we would have had it in the beginning, because students have programs that they're using. And of course, they're trying to explain what's going on and you don't know because you can't see. And of course, you can share that screen with Upswing. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, why don't we have this in place? It's like it hit at the most inopportune time for us. We were just before.
Yeah.
So I already knew what we could do with Upswing. It's just we didn't have it in place. And there was no doubt it was going to be what we needed. And so, that's how it rolled out for me. As far as the student needs, I already kind of knew what the student needs were. And the only issue with us still would be that we are rural, and the Wi-Fi can be a problem, even with Upswing. So that it is what it is. There's not much we can change about that.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. Marissa, can you tell us more from a high level how at Upswing we talk about finding out student needs?
Sure. So I think this image kind of shows where we're able to bring in some expertise from some of the things that we provide as a service, which is through Anna. Because we're directly reaching out to students, we get all of the information from them to really understand in an aggregate level, so that we can see what are the trends that are happening with specific messages that are happening. So the two examples that I showed here, which are one of many, we did with Cisco College. And essentially one was when we were starting to go into fall semester, before the semester started, we did a specific campaign to find out, what were some of the issues that students were dealing with when it came to registering. And so it kind of helped with their enrollment management. And we were easily able to see where were there some gaps in where they were progressing with their process. And then we're able to provide that back to the school so that they can actually use some of the lists of those students to see who do they need to be reaching out to follow up with some of these things. Another example that I have here is where we're asking more about some of the financial burdens that students are experiencing. And this gives us a top level view of what are the things that are top of mind for students that they're thinking about and that they might be concerned, that then the school can go back and continue to address, or see if they can find some other ways that might help in those specific areas. So I think it's really helpful with some of the data that we have on our system that we can use to help the school leverage any type of decision making, or just to better understand what are all the students saying as they're responding back to Anna, so that they can have that and kind of take it to the next level with some of the other admins on their campus.
Awesome, thanks. So that kind of brings me now to the implementation process, right? We know there's some need here, and we've already figured out, okay, this is what we want to give to our students. But let's just talk about the logistical side of things for a moment. Can either of you speak to what your internal processes were like in the implementation phase?
Well, it was all very quick. We had been in preliminary discussions, and I think I called toward the end of spring break, because that's when it all started falling apart, and said, how quickly can you get us set up? And I was told, you're really fortunate because this is sort of our downtime and we can probably get right to you. And by the 1st of April, we were up and running. So very, very little gap in time. Training sessions were set up very quickly. Our tutors went through the training, got their profiles set up in the system. We were able to get our student roster to you all, and a shout out for Anna as well, because in launching and Marissa said, do not launch this until we're ready to go with Anna. And we followed her advice, and had really sort of the interesting piece to us was no reduction in usage of our tutoring services when they shifted from face-to-face to online. We had some other
Awesome.
services on campus that are now a part of Upswing, but chose not to be in that first first semester we were involved, and they had dramatic drop off in usage. I think ours was helped by Anna and by the fact that our distance learning office put a very huge button on our eCampus homepage that said online tutoring. Our library did the same thing on its website. The Learning Center did the same thing on its website, so that it was always in students' faces. And then they were also getting reminders through Anna that we can get you help through tutoring. So a 2-week process, 2 to 3 week process to get
Sure.
it and useful.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. I would love to hear from Marissa again, and see what the data side of things shows, because we did get to pull some numbers here.
We did, and I wanted to give you some kudos, Joyce. Blinn so far has been our fastest implementation. For all of our processes from start to finish, we were able to do this in 4 weeks. Now, I wouldn't say that that's something we can do every single time, because it was hectic, but we did it. And I just really wanted to point out, you can clearly see the progression here with this data table, where one, you're noticing that from the very start, I believe it was April 16th, that was our launch date, that students already started to kind of dip their toes in. And if you look at each one of these sections, so students using Upswing with the light blue, you'll see the progression that happens. And obviously during the summer that dies down, because there's not as high of numbers during that period. But with each single area, the number of sessions that are completed, they start using it right away from the very beginning. And then when we start looking at the following semester, you see that basically at that point exponential growth that happens, because they've been introduced to it and they have started to become a little bit more familiar with it, and then they really just start using those services. So the major thing that I wanted to point out was when we did this launch, because we made sure to go to all the different channels and really go where students were at, by that launch, within 2 months, 15% of students had logged into the platform of your entire enrollment. 78 students had used it. And then by the end of fall, 44% of your students had logged in. You'd had over 727 students use the tutoring services. There was already 175 heavy users. So what's helpful is that when we're doing implementations with schools, we can leverage our data to really understand what does success look like? What do we need to be working to achieve to start seeing some of these numbers, and then work with the admins at the schools to kind of talk through some of those areas and say, okay, we're not seeing a lot of students log in. We need to make some changes here so that we can be a little bit more nimble earlier on, so that we can see numbers like this as time progresses.
Awesome. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. So now let's talk about best practices, right? We're more than a year into, or we're just at about, I guess, a year of, pandemic life and being much more online focused. So can y'all tell me what are some of your best practices for engaging students in the services that are making them successful, like advising, like tutoring, and all of those sort of things?
I'll let Vonda go first, since I sort of jumped on that last one.
I'm pondering this one. Getting students engaged, period, is somewhat of, I guess, sometimes a moving target. But one of the things that we try to do, I guess, here at the school, I've had to try to figure it out actually, because we have not had things like Anna in place. And, one of the things that we used was email to engage students and services and send things out. But we know, I don't know at your school, but at our school, we know that students really don't use their email. They really don't read their email. So, when we talked about Upswing, that was one of the things that really excited me, that with Anna, we could send out those messages, and students are going to have their phones in their hand, and they are going to read those text messages. We know that. So for me right now, I guess I feel like we're in a better place to say that we have better best practices because we do have Anna. I would not say that email is a good practice, but we do put things out there in email. I mean, we do put things on the web to try and get students engaged. But Anna to me is a wonderful resource in that it is reminding students along the way, not bombarding them, not, overwhelming them, but along the way, it's kind of saying, hey, how things going. I was actually looking at some of the responses from students just the other day. So to me, that is one of our best practices to date, honestly. Because we're meeting students where they're at, and where they're at is it's a technological age where they're using their cell phones for everything, and
Yeah.
email is not where it's at. So I mean, for me, that is it. And then of course our best practice, I think you can't do this always, and those monies may not be there and things will change again, but I do like the fact that it has kind of forced us to be more personable, and we do have our advisors are more engaged. That's, I guess, is what I think that's a good practice for anyone. I know we won't be able to do it at this level forever, but I think that's a good practice to have, period.
For sure.
We're not using the advising piece in Upswing just yet, because we have purchased another program that will be with us for a couple of years. But I kind of look forward to that. I'm glad that we have that available to us. And I've made our admins very aware that, hey, before you jump on anything else, let's take a look at this piece with Upswing, because it's already in our suite. I know we had this prior to, but it will be just a great place. And the thing I like about Upswing is it's almost a one-stop shop. And even when I saw that mental health tab had been put there, I was ecstatic. I'm thinking, this is great. I mean, because it is for me, a student support services person, it's like the whole picture, is being implemented into Upswing. So, I know I veered off a little bit, but our best practice to me is Anna to date. And, that we're getting more personable with our students.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
And I think I would echo the accolades for Anna. In fact, one of the students, because they test it to see if it's a bot or if it's a person, and I love the fact that that's when a person steps in and responds. And one of the students sent back, well, they were so excited to know there was a real person. This was better than Texas A&M, which is a big deal to us.
Ooh.
Texas A&M. So I would say another best practice we have is educating our faculty, because they're the ones who have that direct contact with students. So we use every opportunity at things like our faculty teaching and learning conference. We always have our learning center staff making presentations. We have them engaging directly with faculty to let them know that these services are there for their students, just in case the students don't stumble across it on their own.
And
Yeah.
Joyce, do you guys do NSOs, like new student orientations at your school?
Yes, but not mandatory.
Okay. Yeah, we do that. And that's one of the things too, I've kind of missed, because in that presentation, they take students to our key areas on campus, and the Learning Center being one of those. And that gives me an opportunity to hone in on those students and kind of, really give them a feel for what we can offer. And so but everything's been virtual. And so they've kind of cut that out. And I miss that. So that's going to be a good piece when we, restore to where we normally should be.
One of my other responsibilities is new faculty orientation. And I do a walking tour with new faculty and take them to the Learning Center to meet the people and actually see where they should be sending their students.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. It's always great to be connected across campus and not just in our individual little silos. So
That's
that's
right.
really awesome. Um, so Marissa, now can you talk about some maybe Upswing best practices that we have?
Sure, and I kind of just wanted to jump on some of the comments that were just made before I talk through this. We just recently did a student survey, and one of the questions that we asked were where students mentioned or where they heard about Upswing. I kind of just wanted to share some of the results from that. So the number one way that they heard about Upswing was first and foremost through advisors. Second was from their syllabus or through instructors. Third was through their school website, which I was actually a little surprised about that, but it's always good to know that. Fourth was their learning management system. And then fifth was from a friend or a classmate. So I think the common thread of the majority of those things are all digital. If it's not a relationship that they're building with somebody that's either in support staff or their instructor. So I think those are kind of like the key places to really be thinking about where you can leverage to promote some of the academic resources across the campus. What I was going to mention here with this slide was that we're able to help with some of this work. And these are some of the things that in my specific role, I'm really always trying to ingrain into everybody is one, mobile, we've been talking about Anna a lot, but making sure that we're getting these and promoting these types of things to students through text messaging, because that's where we know that they're looking at all the time. They probably don't ever leave their phone alone. So we gotta be there and promoting those things. And this example here are some of the things that we try to incorporate in the message plans where we're specifically promoting advising services, or we'll be specifically promoting tutoring services to drive them to that resource. And then the other thing that I really like to promote in a lot of my conversations with administrators is making sure that we're very front and center on the learning management system, because that's where students are going to get to their classrooms. So if they're already going to be heading there to get into their classrooms and possibly interact with their faculty and instructors, being front and center there to provide them those reminders either through a button or through a banner. This was a school that I worked with that when we launched, they put a banner front and center when we started doing this work so that students couldn't miss it. And I think when you put it in those places where students can't miss it, that's when they're thinking about it. And maybe they're not using it right there at that moment, but they'll come back to it because they remembered seeing that.
Awesome.
One of the things that I've been asked, Marissa, a student actually called me just yesterday, and I know we mentioned this, I think briefly. She was in her online classroom. She was in her classroom, and she was saying her online classroom, it would be nice if it was embedded. Actually, she was asking about it being embedded in the course because of her going to Upswing, and we had that same issue with the previous platform that we used. So where are you guys with that?
So that is something that we do try to get, and we'll usually typically work with whoever's managing the LMS system. So always feel free to connect me with that person on your campus. I'll work with them so that they can then start to embed that within the classrooms. And it varies based on the learning management system, how they can do that. Sometimes they can do it in like a master form where it applies to all the classrooms. Some of them I've heard you have to individually go into each class and embed it, but it's absolutely something that can be done. And that is another best practice that I typically recommend.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. So now let's talk about this semester, right? We're heading down the pike. We're almost at spring break, but not quite. How did you guys end up adapting the student experience to be successful?
I'm not sure we're not really doing anything any different this semester than in previous semesters. I think it's just continuing to get the word out, continuing to connect with students in as many ways as possible. Our tutors,
Sure.
training, and those kinds of things, and had been doing that for a long time. So they're already learning strategies. I think they are refining those strategies to adapt to a remote environment.
Sure.
So they're getting better, they're getting stronger. And I will say this is one of the advantages that we have discovered with Upswing is even if a tutor leaves the area, which happens to us a lot because we use university students, they can still stay with us. And we have continuity. In these times, there are a lot of, it's challenging to get new people hired, even when someone vacates a position. So all of this strengthens our ability to provide services.
I'd say the same. That's exactly what happened with us. Basically it was our tutors, our students, they've been online and they've had this presence and they knew what to do from the get-go. It was a matter of how are you going to reach me? So our tutors have had to adapt and they've done a really good job with that. Like I said, we did not have Upswing in place when the pandemic hit. So we had them doing tutoring over the phone. I mean, they were using every method possible. So our tutors have adapted and have learned to do that to make the students be successful. And, we've had tutors tutoring at 12 and 1 o'clock at night because some of our students said, hey, my work schedule's changed now with the pandemic. I've got to do this, can you work with me? So I've been really impressed with what our tutors have done to make our students or accommodate our students. Like you said, I think it's been more or less their adaptability versus the students. And that's what it's taken, and they've done it. They've rose to the occasion, and I think it's been awesome. But I really wish Upswing would have been in place, though, for me, much sooner. Because when you talked about your transition, Joyce, that's phenomenal. I know Marissa was probably stressed, but mine was much different from that. It took forever, as the students can say, forever and a day. Because of many reasons, changes on our campus. We just have had a lot going on. So, the students have been there to do the same thing. It's just, I think our staff have been the ones who's had to change and make it possible. The students are going to do what the students are going to do. And we just had to meet them where they were at. And I think we did a good job of that.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So now I'm going to point it over to Marissa again. Can you talk through a bit of the changes that Upswing made to adapt the student experience and be even more successful, continue that iteration?
Sure. So with us being an educational technology company, we've had to, change our ways as quickly as possible and be as innovative as possible to meet all the needs. So this has happened in very short periods of time. So some of the things that we did when things pretty much hit the fan was we allowed some of our schools to get on our services and use our platform to get their tutors on if they didn't have that for their own tutors. So that was something that we did immediately once that hit. We were already trying to get everyone to think through things in a very digital way, at least specifically in my work when it comes to engagement, but even more so when all of this happened. Luckily, we kind of already were prepared for that, but really there's kind of like this reframing of the mind when you have to be thinking about everything from a digital perspective. And so making sure that we were having those types of conversations with our administrators so that they could be thinking about things in that way so that they could promote these services to students from a digital perspective. We started coming up with new solutions. So there's a couple of things that we're piloting. For example, a dropout prevention message plan with Anna that we're working on with a particular school. We are building out some of our features so that it can support faculty coming onto our platform. And so we're constantly thinking of ways that are going to meet more of the needs, the majority of the needs, and changing our products based off of that. One of the things that stood out the most during this time was we were always thinking of Anna in a very supportive way and tone, but even more so during this time, Anna just became like everyone's biggest supporter. We really embraced, using encouragement and sending motivation to students and really kind of coaching them through this complete change of environment. And so students loved that. They just, they really connect with Anna, and they love getting text messages that are filled with encouragement. And so it's something that we're kind of changing the philosophy of how we're thinking about using this text messaging service, and want to continue to grow in that space more. And then ultimately, from all of these things that we're doing and learning, really just using all of our data to really understand what's working, what's not working. Okay, what do we need to shift? What do we need to grow into more, so that we can continue to grow in the ways it's going to be able to support more students.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. So now let's talk about the impact of classrooms, and we've mentioned this a little bit, right? Some of the faculty changes, but can either of you speak a little bit more on what either challenges your faculty may have faced, or the students even within the classroom?
Well, I think on our classrooms, we have sort of this semester, well, the fall semester, this semester, and going on into next fall, we're using online and that HighFlex model. And what we have discovered, and we're hoping is more related to students being concerned about COVID, is that a lot of faculty come into the classroom and they have one, maybe two students live in front of them, and everybody else is attending remotely. And that's a real challenge, especially for someone who's used to being in that face-to-face environment. In fact, faculty tell me the most challenging is when you have one student in the classroom and everybody else is remote, because any activity that you want to plan, your one live student can only interact with you, and you need to be doing other things. And I think I heard somebody on a webinar describe it as faculty have had to become octopuses, and they negotiate between and navigate between Zoom, live, PowerPoint, whatever. There's so many things going on for them beyond just teaching the class, that the technology, as helpful as it is, can also get in the way. So we're hoping by the fall that that more students will actually show up in our classrooms again. But they've also discovered it sure is easy, as the rest of us have, not to have to get out of bed, put on makeup, get in my car, drive to campus, look for a parking place.
Yeah.
It's just easier to sit in my apartment and do this.
For sure. That makes total sense.
Yeah, that's about the same for us. Everything that Joyce has said, the faculty trying to, especially those who've never really used a lot of the technology, trying to just teach is not just teaching anymore. You're working equipment, you're talking to the 2 or 3, like she said, that's in the room, then you're trying to focus on those that are on the screen. It has been overwhelming. I think probably like everybody else, that everybody's kind of mulled through it and done the best that they could do. But if they had their choice, it wouldn't be that way. And by the fall, like we're trying to get our staff back on campus, which everybody is back on campus at this point. Some are off because of different things, but I don't know that it's going to be interesting to see how many students, like you said, Joyce, do return, what options they're going to choose, because like you said, we've all figured out that it's much easier to be dressed from here to here and then throw everything off and get back in your pajamas. I mean, I sat like that for days when it first happened, and I found myself, oh my gosh, I got to do something differently, because it affects you. The problem though that worries me, and like I said, that counselor in me says, is this good? Because of the social interaction. We're looking at one another, that's fine, but there's something to be said about that face to face. When I can see you from head to toe and what's going on with you. So I would hope by fall that people will feel more comfortable in coming back, and I hope that the landscape looks the same pre-pandemic, but I'm not certain. I'm not sure.
Yeah. It's a big question mark for all of us. So let's talk about metrics for a second. How are you guys measuring success this spring? And what data or what things are you looking at to tell, okay, we're doing something right here?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we just mentioned, how often are students logging in? You know, how many students have logged in by the census date and all these things, how many have dropped. So
Yeah.
all of that information we used to use is very pertinent now, and, engaging where we're going and what we need to be doing, and probably setting other goals for ourselves. So all of that is important. And I was even looking at Upswing. We just now getting in the motion and using it. But I can see, and it's going to be interesting talking with Marissa, maybe 3 or 4 months out to see how we have progressed, because students now are seeing that, hey, I can get this tutor. And I think one of the things I love about Upswing too is that they see that person's photo. There's a little bio on them, so they know who they're, they can see, they can see them too. And, they know all that stuff pre, the tutoring session. And it's nice. They kind of get to choose who they want. And that's so nice about that. So from the Upswing standard, I want to see, how many more students are using it and compare it to some of my old data from my old program. Because before we were basically using that program as a turn it in, people turned their papers in for review. And like,
Mhm.
paying all this money just for that, really? And so I think it's a win-win for us from where we came. And measuring is going to be I'm going to have to start over, is what I'm saying. I'm going to have to start
Mhm.
here where we've started with Upswing, and as we progress. So I'm in the new part of all of this, in measuring our success
Sure.
with that.
No, that's awesome though. It's great to see which data you're going to be looking at and watch as, like you said, as it progresses. So that's great.
And I think ours is, we're not that much into it, Vonda. We're only there for a year, but looking at usage and how many students are using the service, and also because the students get to report on the quality of the tutoring session, looking at are we meeting the mark in terms of meeting student needs, and
Yeah,
satisfying them, giving them a positive experience.
absolutely. Absolutely. So Marissa has a little bit more data here. Can you tell us about how we're measuring success at Upswing?
Sure. So this graph right here is actually showing the progression of where things hit with COVID, in some of our different services, and how we've continued to see that sustained growth with the services really moving to an online format. So for us, this really helps us to understand, like, what are the trends that are happening? Where are there areas that, areas for growth? You can see even with the ANA conversations. And so those are basically ways that we're using to help guide where we want to place more emphasis in the development of some of our services, and how we're thinking about new features, and how that's guiding our engineering team to really help support that work, since we're seeing that growth, where we're putting more emphasis in building out some of our services like ANA, and making sure that we're developing it in a way that's going to meet the needs for students. So we let our data tell and guide us in the ways that we want to put a lot more emphasis in how we're developing things. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
And then also, because we have a lot of different data to look at from our perspective, we're looking at it from the higher aggregate level, where we can see data that comes from all of the schools, and understand what are the trends that are happening, through the number of logins, through the number of attempts that students are getting in, and kind of understanding how that's ebbing and flowing with the changes that are happening on campuses. Then we're also looking at it from a more granular perspective, where we're using individual schools to understand what success looks like, or maybe where there's some areas for improvement, because again, we can see it from the scope of all of our schools and kind of see what are the schools that are trending upward, what are the schools that are trending downward. We then leverage that data so that our hero higher education retention officers can work individually with those schools to have those conversations of letting them know this is where things are standing. So if you're not looking at it, we're looking at it, and making sure that we're all working together to improve or just keep doing what needs to be done. When it comes to Anna, we're using the data to help inform us of what things are successful, what messages are really resonating with students, what do we need to keep improving upon and keep adding into future message plans. So we're basically using all types of different data to really help us inform of where we need to be going, and then also maybe what we should continue to keep doing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. So now we're going to cap it off here. The last thing that I want to get into and ask is just tips, some ways that we can help our audience out here. Can you, there we go, tell us what are some of your top tips or recommendations for schools that are still trying to figure this out and make online access work if they haven't fully got there yet for their campus?
Well, I would say one thing is, as Vonda and Marissa were talking about earlier too, get those buttons or banners on those learning management system sites, so that students see them every time they log in. And even then, I did have a dad call a couple of months ago, and he wanted to know if we had tutoring available, and I said yes. And his daughter was taking online and daily on in eCampus, but
Well, yeah.
he thought it was pretty awesome that we were offering online tutoring. One of the other things that we found helpful is we have more faculty volunteering to tutor now. And one of the benefits of Anna is our hero contacts me if a student asks for tutoring in an area that we're not currently providing. And I can then reach into the department and say, hey, we have some students who want tutoring in this area. But when faculty are asked more directly and they see the need more directly, they're more likely to volunteer. So, maintaining strong partnerships with your faculty is also critical.
Yeah, those to me, for the whole system to work, you're really going to have to, like you said, Joyce, maintain those conversations, because one of the things we do when we get together in our team meeting for student support services, we kind of give updates, and I'm sure everybody does that, but I keep reminding them about the services that we have for Upswing. And now with the counseling department, I'm not in the counseling department, but with that mental health portion, I'm like, guys, they're adding this, and so I'm sending out everything that I'm getting. I'm really having those conversations and communicating it back to my counterparts, so they're in the loop with what's going on with us. And we have talked about our websites. I know some schools probably have webmasters. I'm not sure. Maybe you have a person in your department to do that. Well, most of us get to do it ourselves here at our school. So sometimes that's challenging, so keeping up those websites and any information, so the information is going to flow, and it'll be readily available to students because they are using ANA. So those conversations like that are very crucial, and keeping everyone in the loop that's part of that, every entity that's part of what you're going to be doing, in which for us, it's not just faculty. For me, it's student support services as well. For me, it's keeping my VP abreast of what's going on. Also, with Upswing, like I said, we purchased that program for early alerts, but it will be going away. So, hey, don't forget that, we've got this thing in Upswing, let's use what we've got. Because in my opinion and where I stand, I think it's wonderful. I know we can't have everything, but it's great to have a one-stop shop for students, because we run our students so ragged sometimes, just trying to get one thing and then going to get another thing. So, having everything under one helm is wonderful. So keeping everybody in the loop is the way to go, and it sells your program because they're going to get to see what's going on. They're going to get to see the progression, the new things that's available. So just keeping everybody abreast to me is the biggest thing. And they will push your online access. You won't have to work as hard.
For sure.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I think a lot of what I was thinking was echoing what both of you all are saying. From my perspective, I think it's really key to work very closely with the marketing department to promote services and thinking of all the different ways that you can be promoting, kind of like we've mentioned throughout this webinar. But they're the ones that are physically doing that work a lot of the time to get it up there. So I think that that's really essential to this work. Leveraging faculty and advisors. We've already talked to the students, let us know that those are some of the top ways that they receive information. So it could be maybe sending some reminders to both of those different audiences and letting them know, here are some specific ways that you can help. Here are some videos. Here are, other resources that are available. Here's some things you can put into your classroom, give them ideas so that they can then leverage those ideas and kind of do what they want with it. But them being some of the major promoters for a lot of these resources, I think is really important to kind of keep in mind. And then finally, just finding different ways to encourage students. Could be through social, could be through maybe an email interaction that you have with an individual student, anywhere that you can just say like, hey, keep on doing what you're doing. Even if it's on an individual basis, I'm sure it will make a huge difference for that particular student. And that goes a long way for them in that moment. And then also doing kind of the same thing with promoting mental health. So kind of those two key pieces, the words of encouragement and promoting mental health, those have very obviously surfaced with a lot of the work that we're doing that is so essential to students right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, thank you all so much. That actually does conclude our moderated portion here. And I know we went a little bit over into our Q&A section, but I know everyone also got so much out of all the perspectives and best practices that were shared. So I really appreciate all of your time. I would just like to plug one more time our survey. The survey will be sent out in just a few minutes. So if you would please fill that survey out and let us know what you thought. The first 15 people to fill out the survey will actually win some Amazon gift cards. So if you are first in line to do that, you will have a special treat in store for you. But we really appreciate everyone who's sitting on here with us participating. And if there are any questions, again, please do put those in the chat. I have one or two, but we might have time for a couple more. So if you have something that you're thinking of that you've been wondering about, please do let us know and we'll get to it. So just from earlier on, there was a couple of things that some folks here wanted us to go back to that I wanted to bring up. So the first one was on the enrollment impact side of things. I know, Joyce, you had mentioned that your enrollment had went down a little bit, and Vonda, you were saying, you guys were just trying to maintain at that point. What are your predictions for the impact of this kind of like hybrid model for fall enrollment?
From us, I think, like I said, ours did go down as well. I think most people's did, but when we look at our numbers versus others across the state, we've kind of stayed in a really good place. I will say that. It could be that because we're such a small school, and like I said before, it's not that we've never had that hands-on attention with our students, because we have. I think that's what's helped us, is because we are a small school. We do know our students. It's not like we pass these students every day and we don't recognize them. That kind of helps us. And we have really put in place those, use those resources that were available to us for staff, additional staff to call these students. And I really think by fall, I think we're going to maintain. The impact, you never know, but I think we're still going to be in a good place, and we're really hoping that our numbers are going to increase with the release of course, the drug. And a lot of people here, we just talked about it in our faculty meeting the other day, our staff meeting, that our hopefully our instructors are going to be given the opportunity to get the shot for COVID-19. So, that's going to put them in a better state of mind in coming in face to face with our students. So we're really hoping that our numbers are going to return to what they normally are. But honestly, we have went down in some numbers, but not as much as some other schools have. So we've been really lucky in that.
Yeah, I think the country, it's about a 10 to 11% drop in community college enrollment. And part of that is the student population that we're trying to reach. They were already financially insecure.
Right.
And this has only made that worse. I do think students really do want to be back to campus and to have a more normal college experience. So I'm hopeful with the high flex model that it makes it possible for those who, for one reason or another, cannot be present in the classroom, not to be there, but it also opens it up for others.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. It looks like we have just one more quick question in here, and then I think that's all we'll have time for. Someone was wondering, Vonda, you actually spoke briefly about, giving information to your VP. Can either of you speak to what data and information that you look at to kind of justify the services that you have and that you're advocating for?
Usage. And I will say one of the other good things about it is it's very easy to monitor to see if a tutor is perhaps not being as responsive as you would want them to be, missing appointments, those kinds of things. It's easy to track when students don't show up. For me, my justification is students are using this. This is a service that's critical to the success of students, and they are accessing it and using it.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I said before, with the our old platform, I was really shocked that we paid the amount of money we paid for it to be like a Turnitin service. I really was. And so, because we want students, and I can't speak to why they did not. I don't know if it's because, I think it was the access, honestly. That's why I'm looking at the numbers so closely, because students, like I said, can get in, they can use this whiteboard, they can upload, they can see you, I can see them. It's so much more interactive, and I really do project the numbers to be pretty high. So I'm really anxious to see in the next few months how how much usage is going on with this program versus the one we had before. And like you said, Joyce, it's about usage. If I'm going to sell this to my admin, it's going to have to be about the numbers, and I'm going to have to show them the data. And like, again, stuff like Anna, you're getting these responses back. I got something from our hero the other day saying, hey, you might want to take a look at this. So all that stuff is going to be crucial in presenting Upswing again for renewal or whatever. I really don't think it's going to be hard for me to do it all.
Awesome. Well, that's fantastic to hear. And yeah, that's usage is obviously the number one thing that we're looking at as well across the different areas of our platform. So it makes sense that we're aligned in that regard. That does conclude our brief Q&A portion, but I wanted to say again, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your insight. And thank you to everyone who has stuck it through to the end of this webinar. We appreciate your participation, and we will be sending out the recording this week. So you'll have that in your inboxes shortly to be able to share with any colleagues. And now we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.